For a solid winter and spring, Count Roger of Sicily was occupied making preparations for a major campaign against Arab Syracuse. By May 1085, the great Norman count was ready. On Wednesday, the 20th of the month, he launched his fleet from Messina. By nightfall, he reached Taormina, and the following day he passed Catania. By Friday, the 22nd, Roger anchored his fleet roughly 15 miles north of Syracuse. Here the Count rendezvoused with his land army, including the ever-crucial Norman cavalry, which was led by his son, Jordan. Roger's forces were now positioned for the attack. Before he did anything else, the Count decided to conduct a thorough reconnaissance of Syracuse. He dispatched a band of 12 Arabic-speaking Sicilians, possibly converted Saracens, to slip into the city. Under cover of darkness, the 12 spies traveled by ship into the enemy harbor, passing their vessel off as a local craft. The band of intruders managed to get a good look at the fleet of Ibn al-Wardi, the emir of Syracuse. By Sunday, they returned to Count Roger's camp with detailed information about the size and strength of the emir's forces. Roger now felt prepared to launch his attack. On a barren piece of coastline, the Count's army gathered together to confess their sins and hear Mass. The clergy blessed the soldiers and their cause. Then, at nightfall, the Norman forces moved on Syracuse. At sunrise, the battle began. In the same waters where, some 15 centuries prior, the fleet of Syracuse defeated the Athenian navy. As the Norman vessels advanced, their crossbowmen began to inflict damage on Ibn al-Wardi's fleet. The Christians with their crossbows were simply out shooting the Muslim archers. Ibn al-Wardi realized that he would quickly lose this battle if he did not move in to closely engage his enemies. The Muslim ships advanced through a hail of arrows. The emir's own ship was in the lead, and Ibn al-Wardi bravely commanded his sailors to drive straight for Count Roger's flagship. The emir himself was wounded by an enemy javelin, but he continued to take part in the battle, determined to inspire his men. As the Muslim fleet came right up against the Norman line, the emir tried to board an enemy vessel, but he tripped or stumbled in some way and fell into the sea. Under the weight of his armor, Ibn al-Wardi drowned, and with him any remaining hope of Muslim resistance against Norman domination of Sicily. With their bold emir suddenly killed, the Muslim soldiers and sailors suffered a disastrous loss of morale. Most of the Saracen ships were captured then and there by the Normans, while the others retreated to the harbor of Syracuse. But by now, Jordan and the land army had thoroughly entrenched themselves before the land walls of Syracuse. The city was surrounded. A lengthy siege began. All through the summer, the Muslim defenders of Syracuse tried to appease Count Roger. They released to him all their Christian prisoners, including the nuns who had been abducted from Calabria the previous year. But Roger would be satisfied by nothing but unconditional surrender. Finally, in October, Ibn al-Wardi's widow and son, along with the leading Saracens of Syracuse, snuck out of the city and fled by ship to Noto in the south. This brought an end to the siege. The Muslims of Syracuse, abandoned by their leaders and bereft of their heroic emir, surrendered. Count Roger was now ruler of Syracuse. With Ibn al-Wardi gone, there was no one left with the zeal to lead the resistance against the Normans. And indeed, there was now little enough left of Muslim Sicily. A few fortresses were still held by the Saracens, but these could only survive so long as Count Roger was preoccupied with other affairs. Eventually, he would turn his attention to their reduction, and then they must surely fall. But with his great triumph at Syracuse completed, Roger was indeed distracted by other affairs. His brother, Robert Guiscard, had died, and Roger's presence was required in Italy to help settle the succession. But by the spring of 1086, Roger was back in Sicily and resumed the final stages of the conquest. In April, his army besieged Agrigento, which fell to the Normans in July. Among the prisoners taken were the wife and children of Ibn Hamid, ruler of Enna. Although he lacked the fiery spirit of Ibn al-Wardi, Ibn Hamid was nevertheless the last important Saracen lord on Sicily, and his fortress of Enna, though now effectively surrounded and isolated, was nevertheless one of the most formidable strong points on the island. Roger, eager to avoid a costly siege, decided to use his distinguished captives to his full advantage. Roger spent the remainder of the year consolidating his new conquests and rebuilding the fortifications of Agrigento. Meanwhile, he left Ibn Hamid to worry over the fate of his wife and children. Then, in early 1087, Roger, accompanied by 100 Norman knights, showed up in front of the towering and virtually impregnable Enna and invited Ibn Hamid to parley with him in his war tent. Roger found the emir to be totally agreeable. Ibn Hamid wanted to surrender to the Normans, but he was concerned about certain factions within Enna, which he believed might revolt and try to hold the city to the death. Roger assured Ibn Hamid that he was sympathetic to this problem and proposed a solution, to which the emir happily agreed. Thus, a plan having been set in place, Roger and his men simply departed, a development that surely must have surprised Enna's Saracen defenders. A few days later, Ibn Hamid announced to his troops that they were departing on an expedition, and, in accordance with the plan he devised with the Normans, the emir marched his entourage out of their fortress and into a narrow defile. Here, Count Roger surrounded them with a large Norman army. Ibn Hamid, again according to plan, promptly surrendered, and that easily. The Normans captured the Saracen force that would have resisted them at Enna. Ibn Hamid then handed his city over to Roger, and so the final formidable Muslim stronghold in Sicily passed into Norman hands. Roger next reunited Ibn Hamid with his wife and children, who had been well treated in Norman custody. The former emir then requested baptism, and then, as a newly converted Christian, retired to an estate in Calabria, provided, of course, by Roger. Thus, things ended peaceably enough for the last dispossessed Muslim lord of Sicily. At this point, only 2 Saracen castles remained on the southern end of Sicily, Butera and Noto, neither of which was equipped to withstand much attention from the Normans. Butera surrendered the following year, in 1088, shortly after Roger entertained Pope Urban II, who visited Sicily that year. Noto, clinging to the southernmost tip of Sicily, held out for a few more years while Roger was preoccupied with the conflict between his brother Robert Guiscard's heirs, Bohemond and Roger Borza. However, in 1091, Noto voluntarily surrendered, and so ended any trace of Muslim rule on Sicily. To further bolster his position, Roger led an expedition to Malta, which also surrendered without a fight. The Norman conquest of Sicily was complete. Sicily as a whole was once again within the fold of Christendom, and this dramatically impacted the balance of power on the Mediterranean. Islam no longer dominated the sea, and Italy was now safe from Saracen pirates. The conquest of Sicily was one of the key manifestations of the rising power of the Latin West. All during the Norman expansion across Sicily, The popes had been enthusiastic supporters and had extended spiritual benefits to the conquerors that helped to lay the groundwork for crusade ideology.